Welcome to one and all. We're happy to have you here. We are continuing our study of the book of Matthew, and we're really at a turning point. We just had the event last time in last week's video, and if you didn't see it, go out and look at it. It's Peter confessing Christ. We're there at Mount Hermon. We're there at the gates of hell. All the stuff with that, and Peter making that bold confession, given the knowledge by God himself that Jesus was who he was. He boldly confessed that faith, and Jesus talked about what that confession of faith, what it has the power to do, what it means going forward, and in particular, what he's going to accomplish through that. He says that the gates of hell will not withstand my church. And that's a pretty bold statement. We start with our text, and it says, from that time, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed, and on the third day be raised. Want to focus in first on from that time. This is a turning point. We don't know exactly how close in proximity this event is with what we just studied, but it's pretty close. It's pretty close because the next thing that happens that we're coming to is the transfiguration. And the transfiguration, I believe, took place on Mount Hermon, and that's where they are. So these events are very close in time. From that time, things are changing. This is a big change in what's going on. Jesus is setting his face to go to Jerusalem. He's mentally preparing himself and his disciples for what is to come. And they weren't ready to comprehend it. And we'll talk about why, and it's understandable. I'm not going to put them down for that. From that time, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and the chief priests and scribes and be killed, and on the third day be raised. So he was going to show, he was making it clear, he was demonstrating to them. He's laying it out. He's making the case that is what he was going to have to do, that he had to suffer. And yet you've got to understand that for these disciples, this was just coming to them. It was coming out of left field. And just as we do with many other things, you need to understand their worldview. These were faithful believers. They had believed that that the Messiah was going to be the Savior. But when you live in a time when everyone has a set expectation of what the Messiah is going to be, yeah, he's going to be the Messiah. He's going to be the Son of God, all of these different things that they would accept, but they had as part of that he was going to be the mighty warrior king who was going to drive out those lousy Romans. Because before they'd been hauled off into captivity, right? Long time ago, 586 BC, they'd been hauled off into captivity in Babylon and come back. And then the Greeks came, Alexander the Great, then Rome came. They had been under domination for so long, and their hope and their expectation came to be the idea of spiritual salvation, the Messiah coming, was welded together with emancipation, freedom from the oppressive forces. Because after all, who was the Messiah going to be? He was going to be the son of David. What did David do? Well, David kicked tail and took names. He drove out those lousy Philistines. He wiped out the last of the giants. This is his son who's going to sit on David's throne forever. Couple that with their animosity toward the Romans. And the Romans looked down on everybody, and they certainly looked down on the Jews. They couldn't wait to get rid of him. So they thought the Messiah was going to be something other than what he was. And even though they had spent all this time with him and he had been teaching them, and what did he said about kicking the Romans out? We've been all the way through the book of Matthew to this point. What did he say? He didn't say a word. He didn't say a word about the Romans, and the Romans never took notice of Jesus. When Jesus was brought before Pontius Pilate didn't have a clue who this guy was. Didn't matter to them. These petty little things among the Jews, the Romans didn't care. As long as you paid your taxes, as long as you behaved, you could believe whatever nonsense you wanted. They didn't really care. Don't talk bad about Rome. Don't badmouth the emperor, and pay your taxes, and you're good. You can have your petty squabbles about religion all you want. So their mindset was something different altogether. And to illustrate that, I just want to touch on, I'm not going to make you go through it, but I've said often that if you want to understand the heart of the gospel in the Old Testament, you go look at Isaiah 52, verse, let me make sure I got my right place here. That's why I'm confused. I scrolled it down to the wrong place. Isaiah 52, 12 or 13, Isaiah 52, 13 through the end of 53, which has 12 verses. That is about the suffering servant, the Messiah, the one who would be abused and beaten and all the horrible things happened to him. That picture of who Jesus was, to us, we see that, and yeah, it's right there. It's right there, pretty much smack dab in the middle of the most important prophetic book of the Old Testament. How could they not get it? I had, and I'm just going to talk about him a little bit because I love him dearly. He's with the Lord. He's sainted and with the Lord Jesus now. See, I didn't close those, did I? My Greek professor was a wonderful guy. He was a quirky little lifelong bachelor German, and he could teach. He could teach Greek. He could teach theology. He could teach Latin. He could have taught Hebrew. And he made us work our tails off. But in advanced Greek, when I was in college, his name was Professor Freilich, a little German guy. He would make us memorize this part of the Old Testament in the Septuagint. And I'm putting it up on the screen right now. Now, I'm not going to point the things out in the translation to you. The Septuagint was the Greek Bible of the Jews. It was the Hebrew translation into Greek. They did it for a lot of reasons, one of them being that they all spoke Greek and not all of them could read Hebrew anymore. Okay? It was translated in 70 AD, thereabouts, and legend has it was done by 70 scholars, but we don't know about that. We do know the timing pretty well. When they translated this section on Jesus as the Messiah, as the suffering servant, you can, in the translation, you can read it and see that they didn't have a clue what to do with it. They didn't know how to translate it. It didn't make sense to them. And so they kind of switched things around. And Professor Freilich, my little Greek professor, wisely made us memorize this thing. He made us memorize it from there all the way down through here in the Greek. And you could either write it out, and you had to remember all these little accent marks and all these, you could write it out or you could recite it. I wrote it out. It took me 13 hours of actual time writing again and again and again, 13 hours to memorize this thing. And he was old school. You just brute memorize things and you remember them. Now, what I remembered from this, and the reason he had us do it, the translation made no sense. I can read Greek if the translation makes sense. If the text makes sense, it's a whole lot easier to memorize it, but it didn't. It didn't make sense. The grammar doesn't even work. And the flow of it is almost nonsense at points. So you just had to brute memorize it. And by doing that, he accomplished exactly what he wanted to. First of all, he was teaching us to memorize, and he made us memorize all kinds of stuff. But he was teaching us that memorization is a good thing because you don't forget it, old school. But he was also making sure that we would never forget this point. The Jews didn't understand it. They didn't get it. It didn't make sense to them. And so they didn't even know how to translate this section of the Hebrew Bible into Greek. So is it any wonder that the disciples, when he started saying, when he was showing them, it's like, just like a professor would do, making it very clear, this is the way this is. That's what that word means. That he would suffer many things from the elders, chief priests, scribes, and be killed. They probably couldn't even hear the words because their minds were just spinning. What in the world is he talking about? Did he hit his head on a rock coming down off the mountain? What happened here? And then be raised again? That didn't make any sense to them either. So again, just like we want to get our mind around the way they looked at the spiritual realm, the way they looked at the earth with Hades and the firmament up above and all those things, it's important for context. It's important to understand who the Nephilim were, to understand so many different things and the origin of demons and all kinds of other things. We have to understand that this made no sense to anyone. The only one there to whom it made sense was Jesus himself. And they wouldn't get it until he had risen from the dead and stood there in the upper room with them and told Thomas to put his hand in his side. And they probably didn't fully comprehend it until the day of Pentecost, when the Holy Spirit came and enlightened them and made it clear so that they understood things. So I'm not going to look at them and pick on them. I get it entirely why they looked at things the way they did. How many of you, and I talk to an audience here of people all around the world, for me, here in America, I've never lived under an oppressive regime. Things are changing, but I've been a free man all my life. I've been free all my life. They had lived their entire lives under an oppressive regime. They weren't autonomous. So I'll understand their worldview, and it gives me insight into this. It made no sense to them at all. And on top of all of that, it doesn't make any sense to me because it says that God would die, that he would be killed, that he could be killed by someone else. They'd seen all his miracles. They saw all his mighty works. He raised the dead. He gave sight to the blind. On and on and on. He'd healed leprosy, cast out demons, a legion of them at a time. How could he be killed? How? It doesn't make any sense to me. And I don't care that I can understand it. I don't care that I can theologically talk about all the ramifications, the background, the history, what it means for salvation, everything else. God died. He died. He didn't just kind of die. Jesus was God, and he died. He allowed others to kill him. I don't get it. I don't get that he'd want to, but he did. I don't get that it could happen. How could God die? And then the whole Trinity thing flows into that, and it just gets, the waters are all the more muddied for my feeble little brain. So I'm not going to pick on them because they didn't get it. Jesus was telling them he was going to die. Well, I got the whole book written out for me. I got all the details, and it's 2,000 years later, and I still don't get it. So I'm not going to pick on him, and I'm not going to pick on Peter for what he does next. Let's read. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, "Far be it from you, Lord, this shall never happen to you." Now, Peter had just had the absolute high point of his life. Jesus asked the big question, and boom, by the grace of God and the enlightenment of God, Peter had the answer. And Jesus made quite the big deal about it. You were Peter, And on this rock, I will build my, not saying that Peter was the rock on which the church was built. There was that play on words. Go watch the previous video. Peter was at an absolute zenith, high point. And from there, it goes downhill really fast. And then that happens to me. All these things that happened to Peter, they happened to me. Peter treated Jesus like he'd lost his mind. I mean, when you listen to this, just look at it objectively, like you haven't heard it 1,000 times. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. He began to rebuke him. He was just getting going. Doesn't say he took him aside and rebuked him. He began to rebuke him. He was going to preach a sermon here and straighten Jesus out. And that word, rebuke, it's really strong. The other ways it's translated, and it's good to look at a Greek lexicon and see the different ways these words are used. Rebuke, reprove, censure, also speak seriously, warn in order to prevent an action or bring one to an end. Barney Fife used to say, nip it in the bud. That's what Peter thought he was doing. He was rebuking Jesus. He began to rebuke him, and he says, far be it from you. And I'm not picking on the ESV here. It's hard to translate other languages it's hard to do translation. It's not easy to do. There's not a one-to-one correlation. That's why, like the translation programs that they're much better than they used to be. But the translation programs, sometimes you end up saying something very different than what you think you're saying. There's not an easy one-to-one correlation. But the word is heleos, and it means have mercy, but it's God have mercy on you. In the South, somebody might say, you poor little thing. You poor little thing. Or, oh, Lordy Lord. No. Oh, my goodness. The word itself was often used just as, oh, may God have mercy on you. Let me fix you. That's what Peter was saying. So not only is it rebuking, he does it in a way that I might do with a friend who's really just blown it. He says he's maybe one of those guys who doesn't always think about what he says, and afterwards he doesn't realize why it's such a problem. And he just said something about his wife in public with her there, and he's just stepped in it big time. And you take him aside and you go, oh, my friend, listen, don't ever do that again. That was really bad. That's the kind of thing that the mood, the tone that Peter was using with Jesus. And then he says, and again, big picture, right? Back up and look at it from the big picture. The guy who would promise that he would be with Jesus to the end, the guy who said, I will even if everybody else forsakes you, I won't. The guy who then, just a few hours later, runs away after stepping up and cutting off Malchus' ear with a sword, then runs away and then denies 3 times that he even knew who Jesus was, and denies it with a curse. He boldly says, this shall never happen to you. So altogether, he began to rebuke him, saying, far be it from you, Lord. This shall never happen to you. So I've got a question. We look at how Peter talked to the Lord, what he said, how he went about this. And my question is, I just, for my own thinking, put a couple things down. Was Peter letting the praise he had just received maybe go to his head in elevating his status? Yes. Was he forgetting his place who he was. Who is he to correct Jesus about anything, especially in such a demeaning, condescending manner? And yes, he was. And then this question: do you and I ever, when talking to the Lord, forget our place and get out of line and demanding answers? Maybe not in word, but in our heart. Sometimes we don't say the things we're thinking, but that's where we are. And the answer is yes, we do. You are Peter, and I'm Peter. And that's why I never pick on the guy. I never pick on the guy, because he's a lot better man than I am, and he's a lot more faithful than I am. And he ended up going to the cross and saying, no, you're not going to kill me like you did my Lord. And they hung him upside down instead. So I'm not going to pick on him. But Paul's admonition, let him who thinks he stand take heed lest he fall, it applies to all of us. Don't pick on them, learn from them. You know, Peter, I am so thankful that every stupid thing I've ever said, every time I've been upset with God, isn't recorded in the most read book throughout all history. Peter's was. But here's the other thing. The Lord still used him. Peter was still a pillar of the church. He ministered faithfully. God doesn't expect perfection. He wants it, but he doesn't expect it. He went to the cross because we can't deliver it. But he does want faithfulness. And Peter was faithful. That meant that after he blew it, he repented and he got in line and he humbled himself. I want to do the same thing. But he turned to Peter. Get behind me, Satan. You are a hindrance to me, for you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man. Get behind me. Theology of the cross. I don't say it often enough. Very important. Theology of the cross. The theology of the cross is that the life of faith, and it's got 3 S's. I like simple things. The 3 S's. Theology of the cross. The life of faith, the life of following Christ, picking up my cross and following him, is a life of service. I serve. I serve him and I serve you. I serve others. I serve my family. I serve my friends. I serve the people who I encounter in this world. I serve. The life of faith is a life of service, and that results in sacrifice. I'm not always going to do the things I might want to do because I'll serve others instead. I'll set my own wishes aside, just like my Savior, so that I can serve others. And ultimately, if you serve and you sacrifice, it will lead to suffering. And all you have to do is look at Jesus and all the warnings he gives to us. If they do this to me, they'll do it to you. If they do it while the tree is green, what will they do when it is brown? Many more that I could cite. We all want glory without suffering. I want glory without suffering. I want the trophy without the sweat. I want the trophy without the bruises. I want the trophy without the sacrifice. I want glory. I want glory. And Satan, when he was tempting Jesus back in Matthew 4, 8 through 10, again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said to him, all these I will give you if you fall down and worship me. And don't forget, they were his. He was in control. He was in charge of them. Then Jesus said to him, he didn't say, no, they're not yours to give. No. He said, be gone, Satan. Get behind me, Satan. It's the same thing. Be gone, Satan. For it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve. We can't divorce this from the context. They just were at the gates of hell, and Jesus stuck his flag in the ground and said, it's mine. I own it all. and it will be mine. And my church, though it'll never look impressive in this world, my church will conquer all, and it's going to knock the gates of Hades in, right? So Satan, he's right there. And here, Satan never quits. He's always going. He's like the yappy dog, except he's a roaring lion who never sleeps, who doesn't get tired, and just goes and goes and goes and goes. And here he is at work. He's temporarily separated Peter off, you could say. And Jesus, Peter was going to do the rebuking. Peter was going to do the correcting. He was going to set Jesus straight. No. Jesus sets Peter straight, just like Jesus sets me straight. Get behind me, Satan. You are a hindrance to me. A stumbling block is literally what that means. A scandalon, just like scandal. A scandalon is the stick that causes the trap to fall, or the trick that causes the snare to spring. And it's not a good thing. Back in Matthew 13:41, when Jesus said, the Son of Man will send his angels and they will gather out of his kingdom all causes of sin. It's the same word, scandalon. All the scandalon and all the lawbreakers. So, man, this isn't a lightweight smackdown of Peter. Jesus is letting him have it right between the eyes. And he's doing it why? He's doing it out of love. He's doing it out of love for Peter and for all the rest of us. For you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man. And when does that ever work out? When priorities shift. Peter, and think of what the disciples thought. If Jesus, here, I put a couple pictures in my notes here, and I want to make sure and bring them up. Find the note. Yeah, this happens. Where did I put it? They thought this was going to be the Jesus they got. Here, on the horse with the bow and arrow. That's what they expected. They didn't think they were going to get this on the cross. And they certainly didn't think that this was going to happen, that he was going to be laid in the tomb, let alone that he walked out. But if I think I'm following him, and I'm one of his top guys, everybody knew who the top guys were. It was always Peter, James, John, and Andrew. Peter, James, and John. They were the ones who Jesus would take aside, who he took up on the mountain of transfiguration. If that's going to be my Jesus right here, then what does that mean for me? Hey, baby, I'm sitting good. I'm in a good spot. Things are looking good. Things are looking good. If instead I'm going to get this, what does that mean? Why did Peter run away? When Peter got this, he ran away. He hid. He denied that he even knew him because his mind wasn't set on the things of God. God doesn't do things the way we expect. The economy of salvation, the matrix of how God operates and how he thinks, it isn't the way we think. And so I need to focus on changing my thinking, because my thinking is a hot mess. My mind's set on the things of man. And where does that get me? Like the guy on TV says, how's that working out for you? How's that working out for you? You know, you got all this stuff, you got all this debt. We chase after all this stuff, and it makes us slaves to the banks. We're indebted. We're indentured servants, but we're told that that's what matters. It's all about me. It's about my happiness. It's about my status. It's about what other people think of me. Well, that's a mess. That's a mess. I don't care. We all need to be able to say this. I don't care what anybody else thinks. I don't care how they judge me, how they perceive me. Paul says, I don't care about other people judging me. I don't even judge myself. I just try to be faithful. Just be faithful. And if I'm faithful and I'm following this guy, then guess what? I'm going to pick up a cross and I'm going to follow him. What's coming in the future? Man, we live in a day where we really wonder about that. I need to be at the place spiritually where I say, I don't care. Whatever it is, that's okay. Go read through Paul's epistles. Go read through Peter's epistles. Wherever you want to read through the book of Acts. When did you see him fretting and worrying and, oh, what's going to happen in the future? Oh, woe is me. Things might not go well. The whole world was against him. Satan was trying to crush him, and he owned the Roman Empire. He owned the Jews, and he was trying to crush them. And I never saw them, and I've looked for it. Paul never mealy-mouths and whines about how bad things are. He doesn't. He doesn't. When he's locked up in the dungeon where they're going to eventually execute him, he says, I've run the race. I'm being poured out like a drink offering. I've run the race. I've been faithful. And now there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness, which God, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day. And not only me, but to all those who long for his appearing. I want to be one of those. I want to long for his appearing, and I don't care about what this world is going to try to do to me. Perspective. And that's what happens. And I have to pursue that. I have to work on that. I have to be prayerful about that. I need to be in the Word, because I'm not going to stand up if I'm not in the Word. You know, it's like, I'm holding on to the rock, right? Always that picture. I'm holding on to the rock. The waves are pounding. The wind is ripping the sea into a foam, and I'm too weak to hold on to the rock. Well, why am I too weak to hold on to the rock? Because I didn't eat my Wheaties. And my Wheaties is the spiritual food that is the Word of God. So if I want to be able to succeed, if I want to be able to do more than succeed and thrive, then I need to make my life of faith and my relationship with Jesus Christ my priority, and thereby my mind will be set on the things of God. We're going to stop there. I want to thank you for listening. I want to encourage you. Give us a thumbs up. It really does make a difference. I also invite you to subscribe. And if you subscribe, then make sure and hit the notification bell so that you are made aware when we put out new content. Please share this video with others. Share it on your social media platform. Send it to anyone you think might benefit from this teaching. And finally, come and pay us a visit. This is our website, decodingthedeception.com. If you know our name, you know the website. We've got all our Bible teaching videos out here, as well as a host of other resources to help you be informed so that you can decode the deception. This is Matthias 76. Together, we are decoding the deception. God bless and have a great day.